Hi everyone, my name is Ralf. I am from the University of Bonn in the working group of Florian Bernlochner, and I will be working on ACTS and Belle-2 during my PhD thesis. First, I would like to show you a few things about the Belle-2 detector in general. So first, when we look at this beautiful image, we see that this is quite asymmetric. This is because at Belle we have asymmetric beams, so we have a electron-positron collider with one of those having a higher energy than the other. This is why we are getting lots of boosted things in one direction. And that is also why on the right you see this blue thingy and also those slanted parts in the middle golden thing. If we want to look at this in more detail, at the very inner part, that is the PXD, the pixel detector, where we have two layers of lots of pixels. Around that are 4 layers of the SVD that are stripes, also silicon stripes. And the outer 3 of those 4 SVD layers are slanted towards the right. So you see that it's looks like a little bit like a pencil. Outside of that is the CDC, central drift chamber, which has wires. And a lot of things outside which are not that interesting for the tracking. We have a time of flight, rich calorimeter, and a muon detector outside. So that is how the detector is built. Oh my God, how can I clear this? Erase. Okay. This is how the tracking in Belle works, as we have multiple parts in our detector. Those have to play together also in the tracking. First, we start at the CDC from the outside, try to find our hits there, then propagate that to the SVD, to the stripes, with a CKF. From that, we do a standalone tracking, number 3 in the SVD. Then we go back to the CDC again. So we are tracking from the inside and from the outside. Then we merge everything together. And finally, we're going to the central part of the detector, the pixel detector, which we use at the end to get even more precise results. The thing in Belle is not only that we have an asymmetric geometry here, but that we are also looking at different types of events than, for example, Atlas. We have very few tracks per event. We have basically no pile up. So here we have only 11 of them. And the second thing is that we have lots of background hits, which is ones from the beam itself, and also because of the PXD, so we have lots of Gaussian noise there. And these things make it quite difficult to do some good tracking. For the tracking itself, we have a software framework which is called BASIF2, Belle-2 Software Analysis Framework. And in that framework, which is closed source, sadly, there is the part which is for the tracking. It's called GenFit, and that is also open source and on GitHub. One of the difficulties with integrating ACTS in this Belle-2 software framework is that it's very deeply integrated. So GenFit is not only used for tracking, but also for the EDM and for all the alignment procedures in the detector. And yeah, the Belle software framework is quite modular. There's one of those modules, which is the geometry manager, that stores all the information about the geometry. And that geometry manager then could be accessed using the BASIF2 framework. And we can also use that geometry manager to export the geometry information into a TGeo file, which is super cool because we can import that into ACTS and use all the geometries of the Belle detector in ACTS. In this TGeo file, we can access the PXD, SVD, and CDC. The other outer parts are not entirely compatible because there are some custom tailor-made things in the BASIF2 framework. But for the basic tracking, that works quite well because we have all the 3 important parts in our TGeo file. The other way around, instead of exporting the geometry and importing it into ACTS, we could also do it the other way around and use ACTS as an external package in BASIF2. This does also work. That way we can code the things in the BASIF2 framework on how to access the geometry and how to translate that to the ACTS geometry. Speaking of the geometry, when I take that TGeo file and import that into ACTS, I can run a propagation over it. So you see here at the inner part in blue, that's the PXD. Side we have the SVD. We see these slanted parts, these cone shapes on the right. This part works, so that's quite cool. We can read that in ACTS. However, when we want to do a track reconstruction, for example, with the Kalman filter, then we would need more information, not only where these different layers are, but also the bounds of them. For this, these slanted parts can be handled by code which has been merged into the ACTS last week, which is called cone volume bounds. And that is already in there. I have not tried it out yet. So this is something which I need to try out. What is not too clear for me is how ACTS sees what parts are to be handled by what bound class, and by that. But maybe the next days will be more enlightening on that. If we go outside of these silicon detectors towards the central drift chamber, there are ongoing discussions on how to do that. We could use a similar approach as for the S-Phoenix people who have a TPC, which is basically the same as our CDC. One of the ideas was to remove this layer concept in ACTS and describe the CDC as one big volume with little material. We'll deal with that, I guess, in the following days. What I did already with what I have is to load the PXD from the Belle-2 geometry file into ACTS. Then I abused PTR8 to make a photon collision to BB bar, because that's the only way I found to actually create B's and B bars with Pythia. That should be changed to E plus E minus. I also get some particles, but then at the digitization step of ACTS, there are no hits written out to the file, so I cannot run any Kalman filter CKF or the reconstruction in PXD yet. So that is something which which needs to be resolved. Besides the physical difficulties on integrating ACTS and BASF2, we also have some conceptual differences. The one was that we are already using a deeply integrated tracking toolkit in BASF2. And also some things are different in how they're handled, like the base objects, how the extrapolation is working, how the material is handled. That are all things which are not too straightforward to do. As a summary, we already have the magnetic field, which is working right away. We can access the two inner silicon layers with ACTS using the TGeo file. What I am currently working on is these slanted parts of the SVD, also the production using E plus and E minus. The open questions which may be resolved in the near or farther away future are the CDC. At which part specifically in the BASF2 framework should ACTS be inserted? And also more general things like how could we simulate the background and how could this be handled in ACTS? Okay, that was it from my side.
Great, thanks a lot, Ralf. Questions or comments? All right, Xiaokong has a question. Go ahead.
I have one comment actually. So for the break of the digitization, this is not surprising because so currently the digitization only works for the generic detector. So all other detector breaks.
I see.
Yeah. So but this should be fixed very soon.
Okay, cool.
We have an issue open to write the digitization such that you can configure it. The generic digitalization such that you can say these detectors have this resolution or this segmentation, and then it would run the geometric digitalization. At the moment, only the generic detector, which is the TrackML detector, has this information field such that the digitalization algorithm understands it.
Okay.
Since I'm talking, I have two comments I would like to make. First is, I do strongly suggest that not right now, but down the road, when you want to really use the toolkit, that you use ACTS as an external and not the other way around. There is no the fact that we ship with a mini framework that tries to mimic Gaudi is a development platform and not something which we would like to have as a product that is forever maintained, because at some point this may just be replaced by something like Gaudi Hive or something cleverer, where people who have way more idea about writing frameworks support this rather than the experimental framework.
Yes, this is only the fact that I use these TGO definitions and pass them around between.
Absolutely, understood.
That is not something which would be used then in production. Of course, later on, as we already have a quite mature framework for Belle-2, we would need to find a way on how to integrate ACTS in there and not the other way around. But for these purposes, I think it's very, very easy to use these TGO files and pass them around.
I had a question just 2 slides back, I think.
Yes, please. This one.
Yeah, so I was just curious. So you commented that there's a difference in the extrapolation between BASF2 and ACTS. How do you do it in BASF2?
I don't know exactly yet. I'm working on it.
Okay. Okay, but at least when you look at it, there seems to be some difference.
Yes.
And then if you didn't know that one, do you know more about the base objects? So here you're saying in ACTS we just have the planes. How does it work in BASF2? You have different components?
No, the other way around. We have only one base object in BASF2, the plane, and the surface layer volumes in ACTS.
So yeah, can I just there will be a discussion session for the geometry on Wednesday. Along the line, we will merge layer and volume description into one object, very likely, because it is very similar. And all of them are also surface based. So also our layer and volume objects are practically containers of surfaces. However, they come with the navigation. So this is the motivation why there is not just a surface description. The fact that the volumes that build the detector are attached to another, that they build a portal from one volume into the next, is the key point of the internal navigation to basically follow the track and find hits or find material.
And this was Niels Braun, who was already working on the same topic as I do now, and that was his. So his approach was so there was a matching between the base objects, and one of the difficulties he faced was with the extrapolation and the navigation, because ACTS is very, very fast. Knows where to go. That is not that easy in BASF2. There the navigation is much more complex, and the difficult point would be here on what part of BASF2 to replace with ACTS. Of course, we would like to use the navigation also of ACTS, but it's not that easy to replace it. So that is the difficulty here.
So yeah, now before we go into fully details here, this sort of discussions, for this we should have time during this week, also either in break-off rooms, or how they called breakout rooms.
No, break off.
Break off or break up rooms for other purposes. So we should try to have those, and then for Friday, that's exactly what I ideally would like to see for Friday, that we actually define a few work packages that say that would be something that Belle-2 could profit from, and we see, okay, what are the synergies, where can we work on that, and probably define a few clear items out of that.
Yes,
and,
very cool.
You gave a very good input to this already. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can just reuse some of Ralph's slides for those discussions. It's good. All right. Any last questions? Okay.